This week in gaming, Awesomenauts is going free-to-play. Nintendo has announced a new model of 2DS, the Switch has surpassed 2.74 million units sold, Siberia Free has received a patch removing the de novo DRM, Stardew Valley has received an update bringing support for 6 new languages, including Spanish, Russian, and Chinese, and a new game streaming service called Rainway has been announced, plus we look into alternate history drama Herald. This is 1RBC Gaming Weekly. First off, 2D MOBA Awesomenauts is going free-to-play on May 24th, 2017. This is a game I've played quite a bit of, and I have to say it lives up to its name. It is awesome. Unfortunately, as has been the case for a great many MOBAs, these days the player base has gone into decline. In order to combat this, Romino is making the game free in order to eliminate what is, for many players, the biggest barrier to entry: money. Romino will make their money by selling players character skins and other cosmetic content. Right now, the game is in a transitional beta period in order to test some of the changes that the game's new progression system and other features will make to the player base. Personally, while I am a little sad that there are so few folks playing Awesomenauts these days, I am glad that the developers haven't abandoned it, or, worse, tacked on exploitative money-grubbing elements in an attempt to milk the game's player base for a little extra cash. If you paid money for Awesomenauts, you'll be getting Founder status, which comes with a fancy medal. Additionally, you will keep all the content that you've already purchased. Awesomenauts is available on Steam for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Regarding that new Nintendo handheld, this week Nintendo unveiled the new Nintendo 2DS XL. Basically, it's their 3DS handheld console without the fancy glasses-free 3D screen. Unlike earlier models of the 2DS, this one features a clamshell design and a bit of extra processing power under the hood, which is pretty helpful for loading the terribly optimized eShop and a necessity for Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, among a couple other games. These will not run on the original 3DS. It requires the so-called new 3DS or 2DS for the extra power. Being an XL model, the device has a notably larger screen and beefier design. As an original 3DS owner, I'm still quite happy with my device. While I'm fond of the 3D effect, I don't feel like it's been that well integrated into that many games. I was never bothered by it, but a lot of the time it felt unnecessary, like an afterthought to a game's art direction or a minor pain because, in order to view things in 3D on the device, it's necessary to hold the screen at a certain angle. Moving around doesn't necessarily ruin the effect, but it sort of detracts from it. Nintendo realized that they could bring down the cost of the devices by eliminating the 3D feature. And so they have. The new 2DS XL is set to be released on July 28, 2017, alongside Miitopia and Hey Pikmin. What do you think about the new 2DS XL? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and let us know. Game streaming service Rainway is currently in development by Andrew Sampson, and it has the potential to really shake things up for the better. Now, Rainway isn't a cloud streaming service like OnLive or the upcoming Liquid Sky. Instead, Rainway is designed to let you run a game locally on your PC and stream it to a cell phone or tablet. That's nothing particularly new. However, Sampson is promising that his program will allow you to play games at their full frame rate without lag. Technically speaking, the latter thing isn't actually possible. There is always a measure of lag with streaming, but Rainway seeks to minimize it to the point where it's no longer an issue using the Rainway MSG protocol. What's more, you'll be able to do this through a web browser on your Xbox One or Nintendo Switch, and, here's the kicker, it's totally free. Personally, I love the idea, but I have a sneaking suspicion that console manufacturers are going to try and shut it down. Why bother purchasing the extra expensive console versions of games when you can just stream them from your home PC? Sampson is planning on making the Switch version available through Nintendo's eShop. If Nintendo actually lets it go through, I will be more than a little surprised. Rainway is going to beta on May 5th, 2017. You can register for that at rainway.io. You will need to have a Windows computer with a DirectX 11 compatible GPU, and of course another device with a web browser. In virtual reality news, this week, Chinese company 7invensun unveiled the aGlass, an eye-tracking solution for the HTC Vive. The device slips right into your Vive headset and plugs in via USB. Its purpose? Well, to give you greater control over and immersion within games by following your eyes. Also, the system will enable low-cost foveated rendering, which is a technique that cuts down on the required resources for rendering games in VR by tracking your eyes and just rendering the areas of your focus in maximum resolution, while everything else is rendered in lower res. This technique saves processing power, and if you don't have a beast of a computer, it'll get you higher frame rates. The aGlass will cost a bit more than $200. Dev kit pre-orders will be opening sometime next month. Personally, I love the idea of aGlass, though it does seem a bit like a stopgap solution. I have a strong suspicion that whatever the next generation of virtual reality headsets brings, it's going to have eye tracking integrated. In fact, the Kickstarter-funded Fove VR headset already does this. That said, if you want your eye tracking right now, aGlass seems like the way to go. In game releases this week, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came to the Nintendo Switch. This game is an updated version of Mario Kart 8, which was originally released on the Wii U. In case you've somehow not heard of the Mario Kart series, all you need to know is that it's a cartoony racing game featuring Nintendo characters. It doesn't have realistic physics or Lamborghinis, but it does come with a bunch of crazy modes and challenges. It also has split-screen multiplayer and is guaranteed to be a good time with friends. Or perhaps it could end your friendship depending on what you do with that blue shell. The original Mario Kart 8 received very positive reviews when it came out on the Wii U. This deluxe edition is getting much of the same praise. It doesn't add a whole lot to the game. It comes with the DLC from the original, plus a couple of new playable characters from Splatoon. That said, being on the Switch means that you can now play a full-fledged Mario Kart game when you're on the road without resorting to the magic of emulation. If you're tired of playing video games alone in the dark, you can now play Mario Kart with strangers in the park. If you ever owned a Wii, you may remember the platformer De Blob. Originally released for the Wii back in 2008, it's a 3D platformer about painting the world after an evil corporation has sucked all the color out. It's not Splatoon, but if you're a fan of Nintendo's Squid Shooter, you may want to check out De Blob, which has just been re-released on GOG and Steam for Windows. The game received a positive critical reception when it was originally launched, and this PC port of the game seems to be garnering praise as well. THQ originally published De Blob, so while they're currently defunct, the THQ trademark and several of their IPs, De Blob included, were acquired by Nordic Games, now Nordic THQ, meaning that we may one day see a new De Blob game. If this port is successful, don't be surprised to see De Blob 2 released on Steam. The Bandit Clan DLC was released for Armello this week. Armello, in case you haven't heard of it, is a digital board and card game. Too complex to work as an actual board game, at least in my opinion. Matches would take an eternity, but well suited to being a video game. This DLC brings 4 characters, a fox, squirrel, otter, and badger, the aforementioned clan, along with 50 new quests in the game and a couple other bits of in-game content. Armello is currently available on Steam for Mac, Windows, and Linux. In my opinion, it's well worth picking up as it has both a robust single and multiplayer side to it. While I feel like there is some lost potential in the single-player side regarding story, there's a lot more that could have gone in there, I think. For the sake of keeping it streamlined as a board game, it was the right choice to make. The game Alcyone caught my attention this week. It's not really a traditional video game, but a piece of interactive science fiction. Think of it as a choose-your-own-adventure book with art and music. If you'd like to try it, there's a demo available from the game's Kickstarter page. I'll let the developer explain it from here.
A small enclave of humanity managed to survive in a place known now as the City. Alcyone is a science fiction game at its heart, but more than that, it's a place where politics and intrigue really have a focus. The city has a very rigid class and caste system forced on the population, and it's run by 6 very powerful houses, known as the 6 ruling houses. Alcyone has a huge emphasis on choice and consequence. The player can align themselves with various factions, and in doing so, really influence how the rest of the game plays out. Information and knowledge are the city's real currency, and having the right bits of it will open certain doors or lock you out of various pathways. The actions that you choose within the game itself heavily influence the direction that your experience goes, and very much locks you out of certain parts of content if you align yourself with certain factions. This means that there's a huge opportunity for replayability and experiencing the game from different viewpoints or different aspects of the plot. Alcyone straddles the line between video game and novel. It includes a fully featured soundtrack as well as gorgeous hand-painted digital artwork. I've been writing for over 15 years, and I've been lucky enough to experience writing both as a video games journalist as well as writing for video games themselves. This is the first game that I've created myself, although I've worked on many projects in the past. I also publish a science fiction novella series called Etra, which was a quarterfinalist in the 2012 Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest sponsored by Penguin Books. When I'm not writing, I help run GX Australia, Australia's most inclusive convention for video gamers, geeks, and all of their friends. I'm looking for 5,000 Australian dollars to help bring this project to life. The amount that I'm asking for will help me offset costs that I've already incurred in the course of developing the game so far, and also take care of expenses like more music, sound effects, and artwork. If the campaign raises over $5,000, I've got a number of stretch goals, all focused on bringing additional guest writers on board, including some names that you probably have heard of, like game design veteran David Gator, who is the lead writer and world designer for the Dragon Age series, among other things, and Alexis Kennedy, who is one of the founders of Feel Better Games and one of the developers behind Fallen London and Sunless Sea. I also have a number of other writers who have thrown their names in and are excited to get involved, so if we raise additional funds over the $5,000, you'll be able to see their work in the game as well. Backers can pledge for DRM-free copies of the game in their choice of platform, as well as awesome extras like digital art books, the complete soundtrack, or really cool things like seeing the house sigils printed out physically on canvas. I'm really thrilled to be able to bring this project to you all, and I hope that you're all as excited to play it as I am in writing it. With your help, I'll be able to make this game a reality, so thank you so much for your pledge.
There's a chance that you've heard of Laura Shigihara. She's composed music for quite a number of games, including one of my personal favorites, To the Moon. Right now, she's developing a game of her own, Raccoon, which now has a release date of May 10, 2017 for Mac, Windows, and Linux. The game's premise is pretty neat. You play as a kid exploring a world of imagination, seeking to have a wish fulfilled. The thing is, the kid's actually in a hospital bed. This fantasy world is based on a story that his mother read to him, and in order to have his wish granted, he needs to get to know the inhabitants of this world, who are really the other patients in the hospital. As a huge fan of To the Moon, this game really has me excited, in large part because it seems like the aforementioned, but from the perspective of the hospitalized character instead of the doctors. I can't wait to see how Raccoon turns out when it's released next month. We leave you with the latest trailer for the upcoming Rock. This survival game set on Mars is going into early access on Steam on May 16th. The game's premise is that you've just landed on Mars and it's up to you to help build a colony, collect resources, and cooperate with other players. This is a sandbox MMO. One of the promises that the developers are making is that it won't have goals or quests. Instead, it'll be up to the players to make their own fun and survive. How will that turn out? I can't say for certain, but I like their ambition. Up next is our editorial on Herald, so be sure to stick around for that. For all the greatest game news and editorials, be sure to follow at OneRuleBeCool on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views. Set in an alternate 19th century, Herald is an adventure game that is as much about uncovering the mysteries surrounding the game's characters as it is about discovering just who you are. In Herald, you play as Devin Rensburg, a young man from the Protectorate who has taken work as a sailor aboard the titular ship, the HLV Herald. The Protectorate is a colonial superpower made up of multiple European nations that have branched out to conquer the rest of the world. At the start of the game, Devin is rescued from drowning, only to be taken prisoner somewhere in India. His captor, a mysterious Rani, interrogates him, and this is where you, the player, step in.
Until someone or something made me soar.
I don't believe you. Now sit down.
You're given a few choices for her various questions about who you are and where you're from. The thing is, it's up to you to define this for yourself. You don't know what happened to the ship, or why you were wearing the captain's uniform when you were rescued, but you still have to answer Varani. Herald isn't nearly the first game to allow players to define their characters by answering questions, but what stands out to me about the way that Herald does this is that it happens with such a cold opening. I walked into the game mostly blind with little concept of its world or characters. I knew as much about who I was as Varani seemed to. By its opening, Herald does a fantastic job at establishing itself as a narrative-focused game. During my playthrough of the game's first 2 chapters, there weren't logic puzzles or other such challenges. Instead, this is a game entirely about your decisions and how they affect Devin's story. It is by the act of making choices that you affect how other characters see the character that you're playing as. So while the game doesn't feature puzzles in the traditional sense, it's not without challenge. At this point, I don't know what Herald's endgame is, but I have a pretty clear idea of the character I'd like to be when I'm fished out of the ocean in the captain's garb. The challenge arises from staying true to myself. Throughout Herald, there arise circumstances that will test the character of your own morality. Will you kowtow to the oppressive colonialist regime that determines how far you advance up the ladder, as it were, or will you subvert its authority? If you choose to subvert, will you overtly and vocally fight it at every turn, or will yours be a quiet protest? Will you take the middle road? As an example, early on in the game's second chapter, you receive a promotion. Instead of running small errands around the ship, you're now serving the passengers. One passenger in particular, Lewis Morton, believes wholeheartedly in the structure of the Protectorate's society and culture. As you bring him lunch, his niece requests a bit of salt. She'd rather salt her own food, but Morton insists upon having you salt it for her, in submissive silence. Quietly and defiantly, I handed her the salt as Morton fumed. I left him salty. He then insisted on having me salt his food, pushing his plate rudely across the table at me. Naturally, I pushed it back, and told him that my name was Devin Rensburg, not Boy. It was a brief and seemingly minor scene, but it cemented in my mind the degree to which classism was embedded in Protectorate society. There are other such scenes, some more intense than others, though I refrain from mentioning just what they are for the sake of not spoiling the game. Something that stood out to me about Herald is that Devin Rensburg isn't a blank slate. Though you are deciding his motivations and actions, he speaks with his own voice.
So, Devin, ready to learn how to work miracles?
My adoptive parents weren't poor, but I'm quite used to getting the scraps.
Whatever he says is very clearly filtered through his own personality. That's pretty normal for video games, but Herald does it particularly well, hence why I mention it. A while ago, I wrote about how the RPG The Banner Saga makes good use of choices that don't affect the outcome of the game, making a better expression of the role-playing aspect of role-playing games. I feel that Herald takes things a step further because while it doesn't have RPG mechanics, there are neither battles to strategize your way through, nor experience points and gold to collect, it handles the progression of your character in a way that so many other games just seem to neglect. The world building within Herald is a delight to behold. In reality, during the 19th century, colonialism was in full swing around the world. Perhaps you are rather young and unfamiliar with the phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," which referred to the fact that the English colonies were so far-reaching that no matter what time it was in England, somewhere in the world it was daytime in the Empire. Other European nations, France, Spain, and Portugal, all had colonies, but their empires weren't quite as extensive as England's. In Herald, these European nations have banded together in order to create the Protectorate, with its own customs, culture, and rules. At the time of this editorial's production, only the first 2 chapters of Herald have been released, but even through the game's small scope and brief length, I've come to understand a great deal about its world. It's apparent that the European powers at play don't see eye to eye in the Protectorate, and that there's also quite a bit of tension between the powers that be and the conquered colonies. I'm impressed by how much of its world Herald manages to fit into a few hours of gameplay with a minimum of exposition. As a player, I didn't feel as though it was beating me over the head with its politics. While the writer's feelings on colonialism come through very clearly, they don't interfere with the story. They don't pull you out to preach, "Hey look, oppressing people and forcing a culture upon them is hurtful." Instead, the oppression and the arguments against colonialism are very well written into a story with characters who quite clearly believe in the system and its benefits. Herald deftly avoids the trap of turning its characters, who represent an oppressive ideology, into 2D cutouts, abstractions for the sake of pushing ideas and little else. When the ship's captain made decisions that upheld the worst aspects of Protectorate rule, I felt disappointed in him as a person for not having the backbone to stand up to the system that he had the power to legislate at sea as a captain. The captain is not a flat villain, if he's even a villain at all. He has feelings and a conscience. Those stirrings of conscience do seem to be pricking him throughout the game, though I shan't say too much about that for the sake of spoilers. In all, I enjoyed my time with Herald. It has a fantastic story, and while it's not yet finished, I eagerly await the game's following chapters. Its writing, voice acting, and world building are fantastic, and definitely left me wanting more. There were some strong hints at an underlying racial tension sitting atop the classism that so pervaded the game's world. How will that culminate? I look forward to seeing. Herald is available for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Stick with us, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool for all the greatest game news and editorials.
Higher. And higher still, I went. That is all I can remember.